This conference will now be recorded.
All right, everyone, I have the official time being 11 o'clock here in Ottawa, Canada, and it's 2 o'clock in London, Blase, correct?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock, 3 o'clock,
Yeah.
yes. Oh yeah, we had a time change here in Canada on Saturday night. Did your clocks go ahead in the UK?
No, I think we're a couple of weeks away from springing forward.
Yeah, you're on a different timeline. Yeah, because I did receive an email from someone who wanted to participate, and I think because of the time change, it was a bit confusing. So, anyways, we will get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. We have 18 people online. I've muted everyone so that we can focus on our guest speaker, who is Blase Lambert, the CEO of the Confederation of Co-operative Housing in the UK. He's an economist by profession and has been involved in the cooperative housing sector for 22 years. And he's also the treasurer on the board of Cooperative Housing International. So I'm just going to explain how we're going to proceed today. I'm going to introduce Cooperative Housing International and also present the agenda. And if any time you have a question, you can write it in the chat feature, which you should have on your screen. And then in between or at the end of each slide that Blase presents, I will read out any questions. So without further ado, so I'm going to explain who we are and what we do, and then I will hand it over to Blase, who will talk about preparing for incorporation, which co-op model you're going with, your organizational structure, policies, tasks and responsibilities. Then we're going to talk about getting good advice on legal matters, tax, governance, policies and procedures, and more. And then external support, mostly financial, government grants and loans and other funders. Then briefly talk about setting up your cooperative, such as details on the incorporation process. And then we'll discuss the next webinar. So, who is Cooperative Housing International? We're one of the 8 sectoral organizations of the International Cooperative Alliance, which is the umbrella organization representing all different types of cooperatives around the globe. So Cooperative Housing International, we're also known as CHI, a little bit less of a mouthful. We promote cooperative housing as an economic and social solution to the problem of providing shelter. Together, we can increase the influence of housing cooperatives at the global, regional, and sectoral levels. Housing cooperatives are more important now than ever, and it's by thinking and acting collectively that we can demonstrate the power of the cooperative movement. Housing co-ops come in many forms. Some co-ops are townhouses and small buildings with just a handful of units. Others are large apartment-style buildings with hundreds of units. Some co-ops are rental, whereas others are member-owned. But regardless of what type, in housing co-ops, residents decide how the co-op is operated. Every member gets a vote in approving annual budgets, electing directors, and setting policies on the co-op's overall direction. CHI raises awareness about cooperative housing by promoting its successes on a global level. We facilitate networking opportunities among existing and upcoming cooperative leaders via peer-to-peer exchanges, panel discussions, and symposiums. by highlighting good practices from around the globe and by discussing key issues, we are ensuring that cooperative housing remains an innovative and flexible housing model that is adaptable to local housing needs. Through an active board of directors and dedicated staff, we deliver a relevant work program in harmony with the strategic objectives of the ICA. So the board of directors meets twice annually, and the executive committee meets virtually online bi-monthly. CHI is not involved in the development of cooperative housing, but we try our best to connect people on the ground with technical expertise through our international network. And we also feature a resources section on our website that includes useful tools and resources on topics ranging from governance to finance. And so here's an example of our membership. We have 31 members from 26 countries. So this gives you an idea of who we represent. And these are some of our allies. Over the years, we've formed partnerships with various housing-related organizations. So one of them is a collaboration called the Cohabitat Network, which is further widening CHI's network with collaborative housing partners on every continent. Cohabitat Network also has a digital platform, which is a wiki-inspired resource that provides detailed information on numerous collaborative housing initiatives around the world on topics such as financing, land acquisition, how their group formed. So you can find more information on their website at cohabitat.net. So without further ado, I hand it over to Blase over in London.
Thank you, Julie. So firstly, can I apologise in advance if my voice is a bit echoey today. I'm in an office in South London with fairly poor acoustics, so I hope that that doesn't come across in a way that too takes away from your experience today. So what we're going to look at today is moving on from the first webinar that we did, where we talked about building initial support, scoping ideas, beginning to get an initial group together to look at starting a cooperative, to the phases in terms of actually getting to the point where your co-op is incorporated, up and running and ready to start trading, so to say. And the first part of that is what I would describe as preparing for incorporation. So one of the things that I always encourage groups of people that are setting up cooperatives not to do is to dash straight for a model document and then find out somewhere down the line that they've chosen a document, set of model rules that doesn't actually do what they want it to do or need it to do. In the UK, we have 5 different sets of model rules that we promote for different types of cooperative. And so the first thing in terms of preparing for incorporation is to take the time to choose the right model rule document, the right structure for the organisation, depending upon the type of cooperative, the type of housing cooperative it is that you're seeking to set up. So those different models, a rental cooperative, a cooperative essentially where the co-op owns the properties collectively and the members each individually rent a property themselves from the co-op, so a landlord and tenant type relationship. That rental could be on the basis of a leasehold rental or a tenancy type rental. An equity-based cooperative, where rather than people simply having a landlord-tenant relationship between themselves and the cooperative, they have a relationship that is based upon them actually investing their own equity within the cooperative. So a relationship that's more based on a sense of investment and equity within the cooperative. It could be a shared ownership model where rather than purchasing a full equity stake within an individual property, what individuals are doing is part purchasing a stake in their property or a stake in the overall collateralized value of the cooperative, or as we refer to that type of model in the UK, a shared ownership model where the co-op owns part of the property and the member owns a part as well, and that share could staircase up and down in levels, or a mixed type cooperative where the cooperative would involve people with different types of relationship with the co-op. Some might be renters, some might be owners, and some might have that sort of staircase shared ownership stake within it. And then beyond that, how do you reflect the relative stake that people in that sort of mixed model would have with the cooperative as a whole? How do you ensure, if you're creating a mixed tenure model, that one group of people with a particular tenure don't overly dominate the organisation and its shareholding, its structure beyond another group, so to say? How do you ensure an equity and equality within stake, regardless of an individual's personal relationship with the cooperative? It's important to research the national legal framework within the country that you're setting the cooperative up within, and indeed there will be significant differences within legal frameworks from country to country. Some countries will have very specific legislation relating to cooperative tenure, whereas other countries, UK included, will not have a legal basis or legal framework for housing cooperatives at all. Obviously, where you're operating within a national framework where there is specific cooperative housing legislation, it should be easier to establish the basis for your cooperative than when you're having to adapt to legal frameworks that have not been specifically created to enable or support housing cooperatives. And again, what are the regional legal frameworks? What bylaws, what planning laws, what restrictions are there relating to a regional or local level? There may be divergence across a single national framework where different states or different cities may have more supportive or differing local frameworks to each other. And it's important to understand that operating environment, again, before incorporating the organisation, to ensure that the model that you're choosing is suitable for and reflecting of the specific legal structure that you're setting up within. Agree the internal governance. How will decisions be made? Will decisions be made by consensus, where everyone seeks to agree a decision? Will some decisions be made by majority or supermajority, where a particular threshold of majority support may be needed? So rather than a straightforward 51-49 majority, it might be a supermajority of 75-25 would be required in certain situations. Thinking through how those decisions about decision making will impact upon the way in which the co-op operates. A small cooperative with a few members may find it a lot easier to make decisions by consensus than a very large cooperative with hundreds or even thousands of members. Where seeking to make decisions or all decisions by consensus might just be too unwieldy for decisions to ever be made. Will the cooperative be governed by a board or a management committee, or will it be governed by a broader shareholder general meeting structure? Will there be working groups, subcommittees, and such structures and individual responsibilities relating to how the co-op is governed? What policies will need to be put in place? Policies relating to things like deciding how people are enabled to become members, how decisions around lettings and allocations are made, how decisions relating or priorities relating to things like repairs and maintenance get determined, what the policy for dealing with issues of non-payment of rent and charges might be, and also what the appropriate type of occupancy agreement for each individual to have with the cooperative, the tenancy agreement, the leasehold arrangement, the shared ownership arrangement. So choosing the right occupancy agreements for the type of cooperative that you're seeking to set up. Then deciding what tasks and responsibilities individuals and parts of the structure should have. So if you are establishing particular officer positions, for example, chair, treasurer, secretary, what are their functions? What are the jobs? Now, some of these functions, again, will be determined by the legal framework that you're operating within. Statute in a particular country or state might require that certain functions are the job or the task of the secretary, for example, or the treasurer. In other situations, tasks and responsibilities, that will be about determining what delegated authorities there may be to a board, to a committee, to subcommittees, to working groups, and how are the way in which people deliver on the tasks and responsibilities that they have overseen and checked. Confirm members' financial limits. Some co-ops require that people purchase a stake within the organisation that might be more significant than a nominal or peppercorn stake. Is that affordable for all of the intended members of the organisation? And to what extent will requiring financial entry points limit the ability for categories of people to become members? And is that what the people setting the cooperative are seeking to do? And then agree on the financial structure. How will the organisation be financed? What will its rent levels be, its service charge levels? How will things be paid for? And how will the organisation be funded? So those are some of the basic issues to discuss through and start to get some agreement around that help to shape what is the right structure for incorporation. So I'll take any questions that anybody might have at this stage before we move on to the next section of the presentation.
I don't see any questions in the chat box. For those who might have been late joining us, if you do have questions, if you could write them in the chat feature, or if you would rather unmute yourself and ask the question, that's fine as well. So while we're waiting to see if anyone has any questions, I wanted to ask you, Blase, if you have an opinion on which form of decision making you think is best. You named the three by consensus, majority, and supermajority, and like through your experience, which I'm sure there's pluses and minuses for all of them, but if you could just give us a quick opinion on which you think is the one that functions the best.
Well, I think an important factor here is scale and size. Our smallest cooperative member in the Confederation of Co-operative Housing has one house and 4 people living in it, and a consensus-based decision approach for that scale of cooperative is the most appropriate way forward. The idea that 3 of the people would make the decisions and 1 might always feel that they're left out or they are rolled over by the other 3 might not be an appropriate and stable structure for 4 people living together in a single house. Whereas our largest member has 13,500 members and homes, and the idea that you try to make decisions by all 13,500 agreeing with each other probably would mean that no decisions would ever get made. And so, as I say, I think scale and size is very relevant in terms of determining what is the right type of decision making structure. I do tend to find also that there will be certain decisions, even when you get to large scale, that it would not be sensible to be making by a simple decision. So decisions to make fundamental changes to the governing documents of the organisation, or even to close the cooperative down, would not usually be made by a simple decision, a simple majority decision. But again, if you were making decisions about, making a stationary order on the basis of supermajorities or consensus in large organisations, you'd probably never order the stationary. So, so quite often, co-ops will have a bit of a blend of different approaches to making decisions, in the same way that they may delegate certain things, again at scale, to a board or committee, rather than holding everything within the general membership. But again, a small co-op would probably hold everything in the general membership and not establish a board or committee, because it would be unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Thank you, Blase. It's always, it depends. So we do have two questions, one from Manuel Sanchez, and is wondering if there's a document that addresses the different forms or different models of cooperative housing, and which the answer is yes. It's actually not on our website yet. It's on its way, but I can send you a link to an area on the website or on the internet where those different models are explained. And I can also send you an excerpt from a presentation that explains all the different models. And the next question is from Santosh. How can a set of members or a co-op ensure it goes beyond the provisions of the model bylaws and include aspects, for example, of, say, the commitment of the co-op to climate action?
Well, I suppose there's a couple of things I would say to that. I mean, firstly, the cooperative can write into its policies and its procedures commitment to broad ideas, but then more specifically than that, it can write specific policies that relate to the detail of those broad ideas. So it might be that you have a general strategic goal to support, let's say, the sustainable development goals, but then you might have a specific policy relating to, let's say, your build quality or materials, or your repairs and maintenance service, if you're talking about the live stage of a housing cooperative, that lock that strategic goal or priority into a reality in terms of how will we do things, and how will we make decisions, for example, relating to build materials, or the way in which we heat and light our properties, that make that strategic goal real, that bring it to life in the way that the co-op actually operates on the ground.
Thank you, Blase. So no further questions. We will move on to the next slide.
It's absolutely critical that organisations are able to access appropriate and high quality advice and support. And on the one hand, there will be individuals and organisations that are well placed to provide advice on a generic or broad basis, but that should never be seen as a substitute for getting specialist advice, just to ensure that not only is the quality of the advice enabling effective and solid decisions to be made, but also that organisations have somewhere and some recourse if the advice that they're given is not of high quality, shall we say. So recourse to insurance policies and such things. The types of areas where good advice is important. So firstly, getting good legal advice to enable the members to start the cooperative up, and indeed incorporation in itself will sometimes require the services of a solicitor or a legal firm to enable that if there is no sponsoring body or trade body in the country or the state that you're seeking to set your organisation up. But more broadly, good quality of legal advice on things like occupancy agreements and on ensuring that the cooperative's policies and structures comply with the legal responsibilities that are prevalent within the area, the country that you're looking to set the cooperative up in. Good quality tax advice to ensure that the organisation's tax structure, the cooperative's tax structure, is as efficient as it can be, that if there are exemptions from particular taxes, such as business taxes or property taxes, that the cooperative is well placed and suitably placed to claim those exemptions, but also so that any issues that impact upon the tax affairs of the individual members are appropriately understood and addressed. It can be a very painful lesson for people setting organisations up if they haven't taken appropriate tax advice before setting things in motion, and then find a rather large tax bill drops on their front doorstep after the event. And unfortunately, there are examples where cooperatives haven't taken that appropriate advice before setting up, and then learned down the line a very costly lesson. But similarly, getting good advice generally relating to the financial model of the organisation, ensuring that the assumptions that have been written into any financial models are realistic and based upon solid benchmarking and experience, rather than advice on finances being more broadly from the perspective of how do we make these numbers add up to say what we'd like them to say. Group development, which we spoke in some detail about in the first webinar, but again, the skills that somebody who is well placed in enabling groups of people to come together and form effectively is a fairly specialist area that can require and involve some hard skills, but some soft skills as well, in terms of enabling people to learn to cooperate, particularly people who may not have been involved in cooperatives before setting a new housing co-op up. Governance advice around how the organisation should be controlled, how decisions should be made, what are the appropriate roles and responsibilities for key individuals. Advice on appropriate policies and procedures. So rather than a new cooperative seeking to sit down before it sets up and draw up with lots of blank pieces of paper all of the policies for how it will do things like undertake repairs, collect rents, deal with non-payment, allocate properties, deal with complaints, deal with issues of who moves in after a member has moved out, how do you succeed to become a member, and such thing, the procedures for how new members will be brought into membership, how will that be handled. Again, it's always much better to be able to access existing good practice that other co-ops, other advice bodies or other experts might have, rather than trying to write all of these things from scratch, particularly if the members setting up the group don't have the experience of doing this beforehand. It can become a very costly lesson if you adopt policies and procedures that are either not reflective of good practice or frankly are non-compliant with statutory and legal and regulatory frameworks within the area that you're operating in. In other words, if you've adopted a rent arrears policy that would not stand up in a court of law if you were seeking to get possession of a property for rent arrears, then that will be a very painful lesson. So again, good quality advice heads off the impact, the risks can bring to bear down the line. Site identification. So if you're looking to set up a new cooperative and looking for a plot, a piece of land, an existing building to refurbish, or a plot of land to build new homes on, what should you be looking for? How should you find that site? What are the key factors that need to be included in a site identification brief, for example, like access to services or proximity to transport nodes, or issues relating to finding a site that is development ready and is not polluted and requires significant remediation costs, for example. Good quality advice on how to deal with local planning systems and planning bylaws. Again, how can a new cooperative ensure that it's able as quickly and as smoothly to gain the necessary permissions that it may need to gain from local or regional government and planning authorities? And finally, a good quality advice in terms of building the homes themselves, the development process. Does the cooperative intend to build homes itself, what we would refer to in the UK as self-building? Or does the cooperative intend to commission a developer to develop homes up to a certain point, and then for the members to final finish them, to do the final fitting? Or does it intend to commission a developer to do everything? And how should decisions around who an appropriate partner developer may be made? What qualities would you be looking for in a partner developer? How do you ensure that the standards, the build codes, the materials that you wish to use as a cooperative are followed through on by a developer, and that you don't end up ceding control over those decisions and discovering down the line that the materials and the environmental standards that you wish for your cooperative to have are not put to one side by a developer seeking to cut costs, shall we say, through the development period. So that good quality advice around how to commission and manage the development process is critical as well. Again, I'll take some questions if there are at this point.
No, oh, someone just came in. This one is from Aram in Pakistan. How to go about the taxation procedure in the countries where there's no specific cooperative tax, I imagine legislation or framework?
Well, I think the important thing is that either the cooperative is able to access advice from other cooperatives or cooperative support organisations in the country they're looking to operate in, where those organisations have experience of dealing with tax systems, or where appropriate that they are taking advice from a specialist tax advisor or accountant. And it is critical that the advice that is being given is coming from a direction from somebody or from an organisation that actually understands the environment of the country or the region that you're operating in, because tax rules and regulations differ significantly, both for the organisation at the organisation level, but also for the individual members as well. Issues of tax, for example, relating to individuals of things like gains on value and gains on investment, or tax on estates, or how are people's investments or equities within a cooperative treated if they pass away and they seek to will them, for example. So I think it's important that specialist advice is sought around tax, and that's particularly difficult, or I wouldn't say difficult, sorry, that's the wrong word. I think it's particularly challenging where there isn't a straightforward and transparent tax environment within a particular country, where people would generally understand what the situation is. It's therefore especially critical in those environments that people take appropriate advice.
All right, thank you, Blase. Here's another one from Niall Mulholland. Are there many cases today where co-ops can begin with already existing buildings, example, a state-owned stock, or refurbishing older buildings, as we saw in the UK in the 70s and 80s?
Yes, I mean, I think that, again, going back to the first slide where we were saying, well, what type of co-op is this that we're setting up? There are many cooperatives that manage somebody else's buildings. So the landlord might be a public body or another landlord organisation, if not a public body, where the members of the cooperative come together to collectively manage that scheme. Or it might be in another circumstance where, rather than seeking a build site to build new homes, a cooperative might come together to purchase or lease existing buildings and refurbish or remodel them. And there are many examples in both, the country that I operate within and other countries of cooperatives doing exactly that.
All right, thank you, Blase. And I also have a question about where you can get this advice. Is there like one place that people who are interested in developing a housing cooperative that they can go, and and it's people who know cooperatives and are able to offer all of this advice, or most of it, or some of it?
Well, that will entirely depend upon the country that you're talking about. In certain countries, there will be existing national and regional support structure where there may be a single go-to point that can provide this different areas of advice and support. In other countries with less mature housing cooperative sectors, that support might not exist in a single place at all, and it might be that the members of a new cooperative might need to seek different bits of advice from different organisations. So there are, and to an extent this feeds into the next slide from memory as well. So where there is that strong, sorry, maybe it's 2 slides further forward then, but where there is that existing support framework, then yes, that might be the case. But where you're operating in a country where, let's say, you're the first people setting up the first housing cooperative, then there won't be any of that support, and you will need to source it from more mainstream advice organisations.
Yes, just a point of information, there's a group of people in Eastern Central Europe who have formed a coalition, or they're called the MOBA network, and they're working together to develop all of the elements, so that they're not each working and developing this individually, even though the legal framework will be different in each country. There's lots of other elements that they can help each other with. And so that's an idea of if you're the only one and there's no established resource group, and you're the first housing co-op, then you can look outside of your area to find some support and advice. And I'll talk later on at the end of our webinar on the resources that we have available on our website as well. So we'll move on to the next slide because we don't have any further questions.
Which starts to pick up on that idea of, where can we go for support and advice and such things. So firstly, where can we go to for financial support? So some countries' governments will have supportive programs set up specifically to enable housing cooperatives to set up and to develop. Those might be grant programs where essentially the government gives money to the cooperative as a grant. In other situations, the government might not give money as a grant, but it might lend money to the cooperative to be repaid at some future point or under certain circumstances. And it's important that a new cooperative checks out what grants are available, both to help it set up, to help it scope its ideas and its development proposals, what in the UK we would call revenue grant support, and what grants and loans might be available to help with the actual physical cost of buying sites and building homes, or again, in the UK, we would refer to that as capital grants. But also, what other funders are there? What other revenue funders are there? Might there be local government, regional government, other cooperatives or other private sector organisations that might have revenue grant programs for supporting cooperative and community organisations to get up and running? Will there be other funders that can provide capital funds, other cooperative funding bodies or charitable organisations and trusts that are set up specifically to provide capital support to organisations looking to do refurbishment or new build of properties? It's unlikely that government and funders will be able to provide, in most circumstances, all of the money that a cooperative needs to get up and running, to form and to build homes and purchase sites. So in those circumstances, it's also necessary to check out what other forms of financial input there could be into the cooperative's model. Discussions with lenders, for example, to understand their appetite to lend and the terms and conditions upon which they would lend. What are the critical things that lenders would need to see in place before they would make decisions to lend money to new startup cooperatives? If the cooperative intends to raise funds through some of the more recent additional funding options, such as crowdfunding online, understanding the appetite that there might be for people to invest in new cooperatives through those type of online platforms, or from things such as community share issues is important. What needs to go into an offer? What do investors need to see the cooperative offering in order for them to make a decision to invest in it or to give money to it? And what options relating to lenders and investors do the members of the cooperative feel comfortable with or feel it is appropriate to take money from? Different cooperatives will have different attitudes to who they consider to be an appropriate lender or investor, their own ethical position, if you like, relating to sources of finance. Will they only take investment from other cooperatives or people that share their values and principles? Or will they take investment from anybody? Is there no line at all? It's important to contact existing cooperatives, both existing housing cooperatives, but also the broader cooperative sector or movement, the cooperative economy within the area that you're seeking to set up your new cooperative within. Existing cooperatives can provide support of all types because they will have dealt with many of the issues that a new starting up cooperative will be grappling with, and will have practical advice and solutions and maybe model documentation, policies, procedures, things that they'd be willing to share with the new cooperatives that's coming about. They might be able to provide some founder members to help set up the organisation's governance structure, or some initial financial startup support to help the cooperative get incorporated and get up and running. And then also investigate what regional, national, and also international sector support bodies there are. In the UK, we have the organisation that I'm the chief officer of, the Confederation of Co-operative Housing, that is the national body. We also have a number of regional subsidiary and member organisations. And as Julie said at the outset, Cooperative Housing International is also there at the international level. But as Julie showed at the start, there are sector and national bodies in many countries. And a cooperative looking to get started up should always seek to link with and draw on the expertise of existing sectoral bodies where they're there. Again, where an organisation, a new cooperative is seeking to set up, where these sectoral bodies and representative structures are not already there, then looking outside of their national boundaries to international bodies might be a more appropriate situation for them. Again, I'll take any questions that there are on this particular slide.
No questions yet, but I wanted to point out to folks on the call that we have a list of all of our members on our website. We're at housinginternational.coop, and our members are, for the most part, national co-op housing federations or associations, and you can, if you're in that particular country where they're located, you can reach out to them and and see what kind of services and resources they have on offer to help groups that are looking at developing a housing co-op. So no questions. I'll move on to the next slide.
So, having done all of the checking that you need to do, deciding upon your appropriate structure, the right model, taking that advice on those key issues, seeing what support is out there, both from a financial or a practical perspective. The new cooperative is ready to start making the decisions and enacting its setup. So setting up the cooperative. So firstly, verify the incorporation process. What do you have to do to actually set up the cooperative? What forms need to be filled out? What fees need to be paid? Who needs to sign on the dotted line on the bottom of forms? What additional documentation needs to be submitted in order to create the legal entity of the cooperative? How many people have to be founder members of the organisation? What's the time scale? How long is this going to take? Because just having a meeting and making a decision and signing a form doesn't necessarily mean that you are a legal entity that exists and can start trading. So verify the incorporation process. Having done the initial checks that one of which we talked about in the first webinar, of checking to see whether the name that you intend to use isn't already being used by somebody else in the country or the state, the area that you're seeking to do this. Move on from there to actually reserving, if possible, the name that you intend to set up with. It can be slightly frustrating, should we say, if you go through the process of beginning the incorporation only to find that another group has taken the name you wish to use a couple of days beforehand. Agree the founding members. How many of them are there? Who are they? How are we going to decide who those founding members are? Is it a good idea to ensure that founding members are not all from the same family, for example, or all from a particular interest group? How will the founder members hand control over to the broader membership as well once they've performed the initial function of setting up the cooperative? Because being a founder member doesn't mean that you have a golden share in the cooperative forever. It's really an administrative function in this incorporation phase, that somebody or some group of people have to be that founding member. Different countries will have different requirements in terms of the numbers of people needed to sign incorporation documentation as founding members. In the UK at the moment, it's 3. It used to be 7 until a couple of years ago, but different countries will have different rules and statutes relating to the number of founding members and who can be founding members. Are there any laws that debar people from being founding members? For example, if somebody has bankrupted an organisation, or they're personally bankrupt, for example, are there other categories of people who are not allowed legally within a particular country to become founding members of cooperatives? And asking the question, are we doing all of this ourselves, or are we using a sponsoring body? Is a national organisation, does a national organisation have an already agreed arrangement with the incorporating body in a country, such that they've agreed model rules, they've agreed standard documentation, they've made the process easier? Or are you having to do this yourself, which obviously will be more time-consuming, complicated and costly than if you're using an already predetermined and agreed route to setting up a new organisation?
All right, we have a question from Aram. If government is funding a newly established cooperative, what could be part of the terms of agreement?
Well, that will entirely depend upon on the government and the nation itself. I mean, in certain countries, governments are not allowed to financially contribute to the setup costs of new cooperatives or businesses, full stop. In other countries, they are. In countries where they are able to do that, some governments will have no additional rules that they'll attach to that. Others will have fairly stringent rules, such as determining who you should house, or the rent levels that you should offer properties at, or restrictions over how the cooperative's assets can be used. So that will very much depend upon the individual government and how, should we say, how demanding it is in return for any support that it gives.
Thank you, Blase. We will move on to the next slide.
And I'd just say that's a precise example of why you need to check these things out before you get to this stage. You know, because if government is offering grants, but it's got some fairly onerous requirements that come with them, you might want to decide not to use that government's money to help set your co-op up. You might say, well, maybe it's better that we raise that money ourselves through a different route so that we don't have these onerous requirements. The final stages of setting up the cooperative then are to physically sign the governing documents and the incorporation forms and submit them, to pay the relevant startup fees. And again, the fees for setting up cooperatives will be different in different countries. Some countries will have a very low fee for incorporating an organisation. Others, we might be talking about a couple of $1,000 US to incorporate an organisation in certain countries or states. Await the confirmation that your incorporation has been successful. Again, you can't start trading until your organisation legally exists. So awaiting the incorporation certification or confirmation, or whatever the appropriate process in the country or state you're operating is. And then once the confirmations come through, it's time to start getting on with being the cooperative. So starting to trade, setting up a bank account, and moving forward out of the startup phase and into the phase where you actually start accessing land or properties, and developing or refurbishing homes, and beginning to operate and deliver on the things that you've set up for in the first place. I'll take any final questions on this final bit of setting up the cooperative.
Well, this question came in just at the end of the last slide before I moved on to this one, and it's from Manuel Sanchez. What would be a strategy for gathering new members to build a new cooperative?
Well, we talked in quite a bit of detail in the first webinar about how you go about building membership and then building that membership so that it becomes functioning. To an extent, it depends on a decision about who are our members going to be. Are we seeking to involve people only within a particular geographic area, or within a particular income bracket, or in particular needs or circumstances, and then developing appropriate outreach, communication and information strategies to make that target group of people aware of the fact that you're setting the cooperative up and why they should become a member of it.
And I can send a link to a recording to the first webinar that we had in January that talked about this in more detail. So I'm happy to send that to anyone who's interested. We have another question, which is, Blase, could you clarify what you mean by trading, by starting to trade?
Yeah, what I mean by that is physically undertaking and delivering economic activity. So, for example, if I'm setting up a housing cooperative, I can't start letting property and acting as a landlord until I am legally incorporated as a landlord organisation. And so, or you know, if you wish to establish any type of business activity, you've got to exist in the first place as a legal entity before you can legally trade. And indeed, you won't be able to open bank accounts if you don't legally exist as an organisation. So that's what I mean by trading.
All right, thank you. All right.
And for different types of cooperatives, that means different things. I mean, it depends what the core trading activity of a cooperative is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Blase. Well, that wraps up our session. We're closing into noon here in Ottawa, Canada. So the plan is for us to host a webinar every 2 months. So the next one would be in May. You'll see the details on social media and via email. I will also be sending an evaluation form either today or tomorrow, so you can provide feedback on this session, and you can also give suggestions on topics that you'd like to learn more about. And you'll also receive a link to the recording of this session, so feel free to share it with others who couldn't make it today, and drop me an email if you want the link to the first webinar that we did that was, you know, sort of the part one of how to start a housing cooperative. And my email is there at the bottom of the slide, jlapalm@chi.coop. And please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. We share good practices, housing-related news, environmental sustainable initiatives that co-ops around the world are undertaking. And then, as mentioned earlier, on our website, there's a resources section where you can put in the resource topic, whether it's sustainability or legal frameworks, governance. You know, so there's a drop-down menu with different resource topics, and if you're looking for a specific country, you can add that as well in the second drop-down menu. And then the third one is the resource type. So if you're looking for video or for a presentation or research, you can specify that in there too. Or you can just, if you just know vaguely what it is that you're looking for, you can just put in the resource topic, and then you don't have to complete the other drop-down menus. So feel free to visit our website to check out those resources. Our aim is to share tools and resources required by housing co-ops and to keep them informed on issues affecting cooperative housing. So Thank you very much. I'm just going to do one last check to see if there's any other questions. No, we have lots of thank yous. So it's our pleasure to provide this information, and keep your eyes open for the next webinar.
Sorry, I have a
Sorry.
question. I was just waiting for it to type in, but I missed the chance. If I may be allowed to have this question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I have the question is related to the students' cooperative housing, and in terms of Japanese and Korean lifestyle, there is a very expensive cooperative students' housing. Not cooperative. The students' housing is very expensive in Japan and Korea. So, in order to start a cooperative students' housing, are there any advices on what kind of initiatives and what kind of structure should we utilize for beginning those things? This is basically for a paper that I'm writing in, and that would be very helpful for me. By the way, I'm Asin from Pakistan.
Can I maybe say a couple of things quickly? I mean, firstly, I mean, it's certainly not a question I can answer in 10 seconds, but we do have a number of student cooperatives, student housing cooperatives in the UK, both long-standing ones and new startup ones. I'm quite happy to provide some information offline, being mindful of the time that we're at the moment, and that it's not a straightforward question, or it could be something that we look at in a future session. But certainly it's an issue that students in many countries face, which is access to affordable housing whilst they're studying. And as I say, there are models both in the UK, but in many other countries as well, of where people have come together to form affordable housing cooperatives for students.
Yes, and there's also resources available on NASCO's website. NASCO is the North American Student Cooperatives Association, and they're based in the U.S. and they have members in the U.S. and in Canada, and so they do a lot of co-op development and have lots of resources on their site. And in December, the International Cooperative Alliance is holding an international congress in Seoul, Korea, and in South Korea, and so we're in talks right now with housing providers in South Korea to link us with those student groups, and so we'll hopefully be able to do a seminar at that conference, and then we will be able to share information and resources after that session at the end of the year. So I hope that answers your question, and we've run over time by a couple of minutes. So thank you once again for joining us, and please provide your feedback and any topics you'd be interested in learning about in the future, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thanks very much, everyone. And thank you, Blase, for doing this. This is very good information. It's definitely not replacing all of the advice that co-ops have to seek out, but it gives you an overview of what it takes to start a housing co-op and where you need to get that advice. So thank you once again, and have a great week, everyone. And bye for now.